Hey everybody, Bob Chick back with another edition of the Voice of Bodybuilding, joined once again by my co-host, Hall of Famer, Sugar Shawn Ray. What's up, Sugar?
I'm ready for the Arnold Classic, man. I always brag that I've never actually missed it since 1989 when Rich Gaspari won the very first Arnold Classic. And I believe that was right on the heels of him getting a second place in 1988 at the Mr. Olympia.
Yeah.
Wasn't Gaspari second place 87, 88, and 89?
At the Olympia?
Yeah. No, 86, 87, 88 was Gaspari. Second.
Yeah. I was going to
Then
say
in
three
19,
times.
then 1989, they created the Arnold Classic. That's the year that Labrada got his second place to Olympia.
Correct. Yeah.
And from that moment on, 1989, all the way until now, Bob, it's 37 years this October. I have never missed the Arnold Classic.
That's because you, my friend, are old. So,
No, I'm a fan. I'm a huge fan.
yeah,
And
listen,
I'm excited. I mean, that's where the season starts, the first week of March. And
yeah, yeah,
I've been there in literally every capacity, from master of ceremonies for the amateurs to a sponsored athlete to content for muscular development and flex and generation iron and digital muscle, and I'll be there this year again with Mutant and of course Panada. I'm excited.
yeah. Listen, it's definitely signifies the beginning of the season, so everybody's excited to kind of get things moving and grooving. And yeah, you're right, Panada. We'll be there for the first time this year. Of course, our good buddies at Mutant, and I've got Celsius here as well. So I'll be splitting some time, kind of representing our good friends at Celsius here today. Um, so let's go back to the old days for a second, John. People like to give us grief because we live in the old days, but that's what you do when you've been around for a while, right? These are our experiences, and you had kind of you talk about your ups and downs at the Arnold. Take us back to that first year when you won, but you kind of didn't win.
Well, I mean, I by all accounts, I felt like a winner. And then, of course, it was the very first year that they drug tested it. It was the last year that they drug tested. I
Right,
found out a couple of weeks later that I tested positive. Not to justify it, but I wasn't alone. There was about five other guys,
right.
and by the time I had found out, I was already I was on tour. I was over in Canada doing my thing, and when I didn't get the prize money, which I think stung the most because I pretty much in my head had the prize money spent. I'd never received that kind of prize money
Sure.
before. But I was so young and I was so hungry, and felt like I had the whole world in front of me, that major disappointment at the start of my career wasn't enough for me to wallow in self-pity, self-doubt. Because remember, a week before that, I won the Ironman, and that qualified me to go back to the Mr. Olympia, where I had made my Olympia debut in 1988. My whole goal was to win the Arnold and go back to the Olympia, but I'd won the Ironman the week prior, and they called me, and it was like water off a duck's back. It didn't seem real that I wasn't getting the prize money. And of course, a lot of my fans felt like there was some kind of conspiracy, which I didn't buy into. Listen, let's be honest. I wasn't trying to beat the test. I wasn't scientifically knowledgeable enough to know my way around a test. So, like everybody, you just got off of whatever you were taking, and you kind of
Sure.
hope for the best. Um,
Did you, not to cut you off, did you actually think they were going to test, or did you just kind of chalk it up and go, look, they ain't never going to do it or do it?
no,
Because
no.
honestly,
Listen,
they never did it to that point.
yeah, I was never under any grand illusion. Listen, this was a water-based drug, fast-acting drug that most by conversation, most guys said that it's in and out of your system within a few days. Well, it had already been 5 weeks for me.
Hmm.
And so when I tested positive for what I tested positive for, I knew I had used it. I took it like a man. I didn't give it enough time to sink in because remember, I was on a world tour. So
Right.
I was making money. Joe Weider reassured me, just go to the Olympia and make sure I didn't fail twice. And lo and behold, by the time that stuff hit the magazines, people were talking about it, and I was in the middle of training for the Olympia, and I went from 13th place to third. So the only order of business was to go back to Columbus, Ohio in '91 for redemption. And I went back.
Yeah.
Of course, they had thrown out the bungled drug test and never to be heard from ever again. I
Right.
won it. I won it again, and all was forgiven, all was forgotten, and it was business as usual. I was off. I hit the ground running.
Well, and people don't give enough credit, I think, for that. listen, that would have destroyed a lot of people. I mean, talk about a gut punch. I mean, here you
Yeah.
are up there, right? And you go through the entire show. It's not like they come back before the night show. I mean, you're up there. You got, the Arnold statue. You got the big man. How did you train? How does it feel? The whole deal, right? And then, like I say, it's weeks later, and you just get some call. Hey, sorry, buddy, we're giving it to Mike Ashley. And honestly, it's
Yeah.
not even fair to him the way they did that because he missed out on that whole thing, right? And so he never got that time or that moment or anything. You just get notified that you're the winner by default, and a lot of people still rightfully think that you won that show.
Yeah, I mean, I had I think the fans were the ones that were more pissed than I was. I was the
Yeah.
athlete, right? So I wasn't injured. I didn't get financially rewarded for my body of work, my sacrifice for 12 weeks to get ready for that show. Um, I went through the winning experience, and I never had the chance really to get the loser mentality. I just didn't get paid for my day's work. And the one I felt bad for was Mike Ashley because he didn't get to experience what I did, and he had a chance at redemption to do it again in 91 to come back and battle me, like all the other guys. I mean, I believe Samir Banu and a few other guys had failed the test. um, it was an experiment that went wrong, and it was I think the federation had egg on their face just as much as I didn't have the prize money. I had the respect of my peers because I think everybody kind of, I don't know. I think everybody kind of thought it was just shoddy to begin with. Nobody wanted it. I didn't mind it. I thought it was going to benefit me. So did Librado. We both thought it was benefiting us, but maybe that was how it had to start for me to finish my career so strong with the resilience. I needed to take my lumps early in my career. Listen, nobody more than myself would have loved for that drug test to stick around. I felt it was benefiting the smaller guys. Um, I didn't really have the chance to feel embarrassed because I knew what my peers were doing. I knew what everybody in the industry was doing. So, I mean, if everyone's doing it, who's cheating? I didn't have a chance really to feel sorry or sad. I kind of felt like my life was on pause because I didn't get the financial reward, but I was smart enough prior to that event happening to book myself way in advance to the point where I was just busy enough not to think about having to give back the trophy, not having the prize money. But it was enough of a pain for me to know that as soon as they said I was positive, I was going back. And to go back and go through the whole routine of winning, have the speech with Arnold, have the prize money increase, have the trophy that I could represent to my mom. Um, it felt very redeeming for me. And no one ever talked about steroids again. They only talked about the diuretics, which were probably more dangerous at the time.
You never actually went back to the Arnold after that, did you?
I went back in 91 and I went back in 96. 96, I jumped in to
90.
the
Oh, I,
Ironman.
I forgot
Yeah,
about 96. Yeah.
yeah, I was training with Flex Wheeler, and everybody kept telling me I was looking better than him. And as stupid and naive as I was, I jumped in with like 6, 7 weeks before the show, which I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but I wound up in the top five, even on an off day. And I had gotten third the week prior at the Ironman. Of course, Flex and Kevin were better than me, and Paul Dillette got his comeuppance that time. But the 96 Arnold was the last time I went because I was always in my mind trying to be Mr. Olympia. And if I didn't become Mr. Olympia, I would have nothing to hold myself back with. I felt the Arnold Classic was getting in the way of me trying to be a better Olympian.
It's interesting how history kind of changes with certain things. Like for instance, had you won that first one, you obviously came back the next year and won outright. You would have had two Arnold Classic championships, and I wonder if that might have, spurred you on to go on for a three or four or five. In the spirit of like Flex Wheeler did years later.
Well,
But obviously, you had to have, even though you won it and you redeemed yourself. You're like you say, your goals shifted to the Olympia.
Well, my goal was always the Olympia. I don't think I would have been there in 91, to be honest,
No.
perfectly honest, because I wasn't competing for the prize money, right? I mean, I wanted to be Mr. Olympia, and I thought everything else would get in the way of that happening for me, which is why I held steadfast of not doing those tours after the Mr. Olympia. And I could
Yeah.
have. I mean, Flex and Chris and Kevin, they made a great living doing all of those shows, traveling around the world. Ronnie Coleman winning all those. But I had it in my mind that for me, trying to be Mr. Olympia would set me up in a way that I could see the world and not see the world with Tupperware dishes and dirty, sweaty clothes
Right.
and
Yeah.
having to get ready for a show. It was hard enough getting ready for one show, but I was very satisfied in my role of being an ambassador, and I thought everything else would just get in the way. So I might not have wound up there in '91 if that hadn't happened to me in 1990.
Well, I want to circle back to the Arnold in just a bit as we're approaching just a few weeks out from the start. But this past weekend, I had my boys down from sunny Rochester, New York, as a snowstorm was blizzarding up there. They came down to visit for our annual Super Bowl bash, and to
Yeah,
say we were a little bit disappointed. First of all, Buffalo wasn't in there. Obviously, our
yep.
team's Dallas and the Raiders, bombed us this year, anyways. But my other team, Buffalo, should have, would have, and could have been there, and certainly would have been a better game. But it was the Chiefs who did not show up in grand fashion, bro. What the hell was going on at the Super Bowl?
Yeah. Listen, and it happens. I think I'm not a betting man, but of course I didn't have a horse in that race, and they lost my attention at halftime
Yeah,
because the Super Bowl is either a close game or it's a blowout. When it's a blowout, I'm chips and beer for me. I'm good, some chicken wings. As a matter of fact, I was falling asleep in the second half, and
right.
Super Bowl can be something that can be pretty anticlimactic at times, and if you don't have a team in it, it's not all that. But I'll tell you, it's going to be a long off season, and it football ended right at the right time because now it's bodybuilding season. So my first love.
Sure is. Well, what did you make? The most of the talk hasn't even been about the Super Bowl, really, but more about the halftime. Now, I know we don't really fit the demographics, either one of us, of a lot of the current, like we were googling as it was going on because I had no idea who some of these people were, but apparently Kendrick Lamar, had these messages and things and stuff, and my only question is this. I mean, first of all, I would just like to be entertained, after I hit the bathroom and grab some pizza and stuff. But if you have to explain a message that much or that in depth, did you really send any message?
Well, I'm just the opposite because I loved it and I knew what the message was and I got it right from the first note. I picked up on it. Listen, this is where we're at in terms of people that are disenfranchised. I love country music. I'm a musician aficionado. I know who the Sex Pistols are. I know who I know who Linda Ronstadt is. I know who's the guy that just made a documentary, Bob Dylan. I listen to
Yeah,
everything. Jimi Hendrix, the Sex Pistols, AC/DC, Kiss. I
sure.
grew up on that, and I can rock and roll with Taylor Swift. I know all of that stuff. So for me, it caught my attention to pay attention to all those subliminal messages that might have went right over someone's head. When you pigeonhole your musical tastes into
Right.
one genre, of course it's going to sound Chinese. If you like country and western, it doesn't
Right.
matter. It wouldn't have mattered if we had Tony Braxton on that stage. You wouldn't have been satisfied, or Shakira, or J Lo. At the end of the day, every year you have one or two acts and it's over. I personally loved Michael Jackson. I loved
Oh,
Prince. Those are my,
come on. Yeah.
bring back Kiss, right? I can rock and roll with Creed, but I'm not so caught up in the halftime show that I either have to like it or I have to hate it. This is generational music that some of us that are aging out. You're over 50 years old. You may have never heard of Kendrick Lamar. Well, let me just enlighten you a little bit. The guy just won 5 Grammys like the weekend before.
Right.
So he's not a nobody from nowhere. But if you never heard his music, you never seen his videos, you never heard the messaging, of course it's going to sound like Chinese and you're going to be pissed because it's not tickling your ear. But that just tells you you're limiting your musical taste. You're not paying attention to musical awareness. And you're the one that's got a problem if you can't sit there and try to decipher. All right, I don't know who it is. Let me take a deeper dive. I personally listen to everything from Andrea Bocelli to Sade to
Yeah.
Elvis Presley. So I don't feel any kind of way about it. But I thought it was genius how all of those messages were in there, and you had to pay attention, or the message would go right over your head.
Well, he's certainly very talented, and if you actually could hear, it was difficult to hear what he was saying through a lot of it just because of the noise. But that said, the guy's definitely gifted. I mean, when it comes to the art of rap and putting a message across, I kind of dig the old days. I mean, listen, you couldn't beat Prince, Michael Jackson, some of those. But what I liked about some of the old acts is they incorporated a lot of different styles, just like you're saying. there was maybe a country guy, and then there was a rap guy, and then there was a rock and roll guy. I like when they kind of do the different genres because it is a little bit more, hate to use the word inclusive, to those people that, everybody watches the Super Bowl, right? But it's amazing that the amount of stuff that it's getting out there.
Well, let me tell you, it was the most watched Super Bowl, more halftime show, more
Yeah.
than Michael Jackson. He actually broke Michael Jackson's record of 135 million over 133 million. So who's down the road? Who are we talking about? Are we talking about AC/DC? Are we talking about Creed? Are we talking about Kiss? It doesn't matter. You already know that next year it's probably going to be a radical turn to the right. And I wouldn't be surprised if they had somebody like Blondie or somebody up there, a throwback
I,
artist.
I
But
think
you know
it's
what?
in I think it's in San Francisco next year, the Super
It
Bowl,
is.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So maybe
Listen,
if somebody see like this year, right? Like it was in New Orleans. I mean, call me crazy, but I would always think like you could have some local flavor, like maybe some bands or some greats. I know they had Harry Connick, who's iconic when it comes to New Orleans, but that was at the beginning, before the game even started. But I feel like that would have been kind of cool, a little mishmash in there. So like you say. But by the way, for the record, nobody's beat. I don't care how many people watch this thing. There's more people on the earth, so I'm not taking this away from Michael Jackson quite yet. But go watch. I'd implore anybody, go watch the first 2 minutes when Michael Jackson comes out there, and he's just standing there. And I
yeah,
tell you what, you talk about working,
1993, I think it
talk
was.
about greatness, Shawn. Right? The guy is standing there, and I was watching a behind the scenes thing. Right? Yeah. He had the outfit on, right? The whole class with the sunglasses. And I was listening to the producer guy this week. He was on a piece from back then. And he says the only thing Michael asked for was, he said, don't start the music part until I take my sunglasses off.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
He says, no problem, right? Now, from a producing standpoint, 2 minutes is forever, right? And he's telling the story about how Michael comes out, boom, 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 here he is, then bam, he's right there. Crowd's
Yeah.
going nuts, right? And he's just standing there, and he can't connect to him, but he's talking to the production. He's like, come on, Michael, come on. He's looking at come on. And then finally he goes up, and grabs the sunglasses, and boom, the music. You can't beat that. You can't
Well,
beat. There is nobody on the earth today who can equal that, in my opinion.
no, and you are talking about the biggest, most popular person ever. I
Yeah.
mean, and Muhammad Ali's my guy, but there's nobody that tops Michael Jackson, and that's even including his Super Bowl performance. So the older we get, the more we yearn for stuff from yesterday. But you know what? Who's to say? Next year in San Francisco, they may have a little boy band that we don't even know because they're so much
Well,
younger than us. How are we going to complain? Listen, I'm there for the football game. The halftime thing is, whatever. But
well,
what it took, what the fallout is telling me on social media is there are a lot more people that are not in tune with all flavors of music, or they're just not receptive to it. And so if you don't like it, you criticize it. In the old days, we had nowhere to go to criticize it. Listen, there's musical acts out there that I don't like, but I can't take away the musical genius of those artists. You just have to appreciate it. It's like art. It's great for some and it's horrible for others.
nobody's beating Michael Jackson, and still nobody's topping Whitney Houston for her
That's true.
rendition of the of the national anthem at that Olympic. What was it, 88, 84, somewhere around there?
Yeah, I thought it was
Uh,
93, but go ahead.
can't you ain't nobody's ever touching that ever, and
I agree.
ever. But so in the bodybuilding world, moving on from the Super Bowl, hey, we're done with football. Another hopefully some good offseason move by our teams, and maybe they can get there next year. But so I just saw earlier today um, a post by our good friend. You remember a guy, you might have even competed against him a few times, Eddie Elwood out of England.
Yes. I remember Eddie Elwood. Yes.
Eddie Elwood, big boy out of, he was a NABA guy, came over, competed a handful of times in the IFBB, didn't
I
fare
didn't
very
compete
well.
with him though. Yeah.
Yeah, but he would have been around your era. But unfortunately, he wasn't. He was a big fish in a small pond over there. But pretty much last in every show he did in the IFBB. But
Yeah.
he just put out a piece I just caught earlier, where he's basically kind of bitching that the IFBB, our IFBB, put out this mandate of wanting people to compete and get on stage and all this stuff. And his basic message is that, hey, NABA was the king, it's just the best on the earth, and this and that, and we allow anybody from anywhere to compete, blah blah blah, And then he kind of goes on to say that there was, pretty much all the competitors from NABA got the shaft when they tried to compete in the IFBB, and I got to say, I got into it with Eddie a few years back online for some nonsense. But listen, the only guy I thought out of NABA that came over to the IFBB to compete that legitimately probably would have, should have, and could have done better, in my opinion, was also the man that I said was the most underrated of all time, and that was Charles Claremont. I thought he was great. I thought he should have probably done. He won a handful of shows, but I know he was a little on the narrow side. I know our old friend Peter McGuff, God bless you, Peter. He told me like I was very impressed with him. He says, but he was a little up and down, a little narrow, and that's why he didn't do better. But did you see any of this? These NABA guys getting royally screwed back then, or were they just not as good as the IFBB guys?
Well, like you said, the older guys like to reminisce about the old days. Some of these new guys don't even know what NABA is. But
Yeah, no.
when we were coming up, some of the NABA guys that had a really good run, Eduardo Kawak, um, Jeff King. I think did
Yeah.
Jeff King do the
Well,
NABA?
Jeff King never even
He was
got to the
AAU.
pros
Yeah,
because he was AAU Mr. America. He
right.
wanted to compete in the pros, but Jim Mannion, to his credit back then, said, "Look, we don't bend the rules for people and stuff. Go in the NPC, win the nationals or whatever, and you'll compete as a pro. You'll
Yeah.
do great." And he
Well,
never wanted to do that because he thought it was a step down to go to the
correct.
NPC. So he stayed over in
Yeah,
AAU land, and that's fine by me. But Eduardo Kowak is a great example.
yeah.
um, I was never. He had a lot of muscle, but he was put together very
Boxy.
strangely,
Yeah,
boxy looking. Had the Tarzan hair, and the
yeah.
trunks working there. I don't think he got screwed. I just don't think he was as
No.
good as the guys.
Listen, we had Serge Nubray come over. My mentor, John Brown, was NABA guys. NABA was coming when those guys came from NABA. They disappeared in the IFBB. Now,
Right.
that being said, Eddie's going so far back, he would have done better in the NABA instead of coming into the IFBB
Yeah.
because the caliber was a little bit smaller. The gene pool wasn't as vast. Um, some of the guys that were coming, most of the guys that were coming from Europe were NABA guys that were
Yeah.
coming over
Sure.
to
All of them.
the IFBB took off in the late '80s, and NABA could not keep up. It was like the NPC and the
Yeah.
AAU coming
Exactly right.
in the '80s. When the '80s came around, NPC just blew right past the AAU. Eddie's he's waxing on his memories, right? But the NABA doesn't hold a candle to the IFBB Pro League, and it didn't hold a candle to the IFBB. And there was a lot of politics on what they wanted to do. He definitely would have stood a better chance in NABA than he did coming over to IFBB. A
Well,
lot of
he
guys
did.
did not come to IFBB because they weren't as good.
Listen, he did. He was king over there. This guy won
Yeah,
the Mr. Universe, whatever they had over there,
but there's nowhere to
multiple
go.
times.
Yeah, there was nowhere to
But then
go.
again, he went from being a multi-time Mr. Universe to last place, like literally last place in most of the shows that he contended in. But
Yeah,
and again, I'm saying it's not to rain in the guy's parade, but listen, he was a big guy, but he was very boxy, very square. Didn't have the small waist or any of those type of things, and listen, he was competing at a time where it was pretty much the golden era of when it came to competition.
yeah,
The
the
likes of
genetics.
yourself and Flex and Kevin and Matarazzo and
Yeah,
even the guys that weren't in the top five or so were damn good back then. It
yeah. I
was
think
very deep back then.
Eddie came out with like Selwyn Cottrell and Big Sean Davies, the dinosaur. He passed away.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there was a slew of English bodybuilders. He came on the tail end of the Lion King. What was that guy's name?
The Lion
Uh,
King,
yeah, they call him Leo the Lion. What was his name?
Mufasa. Oh,
No, no. He had that square jaw. You know who I'm talking about.
the Lion King. I'm trying to think.
Frank Richards. Frank
Oh,
Richards.
Frank Richards. He was
Yeah,
the
they called him
Lion
like
King.
I'm not sure if it was the Lion King, but it was the Lion something. But
I heard a great story about Frank Richards years ago from an inside source that said he accepted he got like an invite or he qualified for the Olympia or something, and he only took it because he wanted to come over to America and get basically a free plane ride and stuff like that. He knew he wasn't going to do anything in the Olympia, so he
yeah,
limped into the Olympia looking like he was in dead last place, but he got the free the free flight and hotel and stuff like
yeah.
that. But
Nava presented a lot of personalities for us, but they never did produce a really like a superstar from Naba.
well, it brings me to my point, with Eddie Elwood here, waxing on about how great NAB is and the history and the long history. And the NAB has been around longer and it was longer than the IFBB and then Joe Weider.
That's okay.
And it's like, look, Eddie, I get it, okay, but there's a big difference between you can name more NABA stars from 1940 and 50 than you could present day.
Yeah,
Okay, you
Well,
couldn't name me anybody, obviously. You got to go back to those days. I don't even know if they were still in business. All I know is they spent an awful lot of time talking about us, talking about the pro league, and this is between Eddie, Lee Priest. I have never heard Lee Priest, who was the president or some such thing of NABA Australia,
yeah.
and then competed in the NABA Mr. Universe not that long ago, and actually was a promoter just up until this past year. I don't think I've ever heard him say anything about NABA.
No, well, because you're right. He didn't promote it, but there was nothing actually achieved with it either. I think it was the
No.
title, and that was it.
So, but why, it's like, why, Eddie, why aren't you out there talking about NABA? Why aren't you talking and talking that up and seeing about getting more money for your athlete, but why rag on the IFBB and our rules and whether people have to compete, they don't have to compete? I got to defend the IFBB fully on this one, where it's like, look at, the rules when you come in, okay? And the number one rule, okay, of all rules that we have, the number one is that you cannot compete in a rival federation. Okay. Anything else you can do? Appearances. You can do stuff for your companies and stuff. We've both been part of that
Sure.
process where they lightened up over the years, where you were able to do stuff like that. But the one thing you can't do is compete in another federation. They've
Well,
opened their doors. They've opened the floodgates, saying that they'll accept anybody from any federation now. That doesn't sound like a company that's doing too good to me.
I mean, we just said the NFL football season's over, right? So, uh, technically, if you're healthy and you're young enough, why don't you just go pick up with the Canadian League when they start
Sure.
their thing? You can't do it. You can't represent Adidas and Nike at the same time. You can't play for the NBA and go over and play over in Italy or the Chinese team. Um, if you want to compete in the NABA, compete in the NABA. If you want to compete in the IBB Pro League, compete in the Pro League. But you're going to have to choose one. That's
Right.
not a big. That's not a.
Well, yeah, the bottom line, Shawn, is you're right. Listen, we don't lock the doors from the outside. If somebody hypothetically wanted to go and compete in the Mr. Universe in a different federation, be it NABA or anybody else for that matter, you can go and you
Yeah.
can go and compete there. Now, what you do is you lose your IFBB pro status, as you should, because that's something I actually submitted some years back because I didn't think it was fair, to the loyal people in the IFBB Pro League that you get to bounce back and forth. It's like, well, then you don't have that rule in your federation. Now, you would have to go back through the amateurs, but so what? Maybe somebody doesn't care. Go be a two-time Mr. USA or a national champ and make your way back to the pros if you want to. But what you can't do is compete for them at the same time, much like you can't compete and play for the Dallas Cowboys and the Raiders at the same time.
Well, I just saw the documentary on the Vince McMahon story. You can't do the WWE and the
Right.
AAW, whatever the heck it is. You got to kind of choose one. It really isn't even a talking point. So I don't know what they're talking about.
Well, the argument there, of course, on the counter would be, well, but those are paid athletes. They're getting paid to be there. You guys ain't getting paid. It's like, well, no, you're not getting paid a salary, but you do compete for money. And
Right.
the door that opens is huge. It's not just the prize money, because obviously very few people make a living from prize money. Okay. It's the door that opens to the appearances, guest posings, seminars, NPC shows, which are worldwide now and have been for some years. All that opens up to you. And people that have left the organization found out real quick, listen, companies want to sponsor the most popular bodybuilders in the world. That happens to be in the IFBB Pro League. So yeah, it kind of makes more sense to be there where the opportunities are. The minute you get outside that parameter, I don't see a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of things out there.
Well, when's the last time you saw the word NABA champion behind someone's name? You just don't. It doesn't really carry water.
Maybe in their small little circle there in England or something. But I mean, outside of there, nobody would even know who you're talking about. That's not ever celebrated. But everybody knows who Samson is.
Yeah.
Everybody knows who Derek is, right? Everybody knows who Andrew Jack is, and all the rest.
Well,
And
listen, if the door's open, why aren't these guys going over to compete in the NABA Federation? The door's
well, that's
open.
the well, that's the funny part because they answer their own question. There's no money.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, as much as we always are begging for more money, and the pro league's done a nice job again, I got to give credit where it's due, and bumping those prize monies up, and hopefully that'll continue this year. Arnold's up in prize money up to $500,000. The Olympia bumped up 200 grand on the spot. That'll probably go up towards a million, if not somewhere in the next year or so, I would guess.
Money
Um,
talks.
right? Even the bigger, the New York Pro, the
Yeah.
Texas Pro, Tampa, all these are all going up all the time. And that's great. And of course, we all want more money, but it's still more money than anybody else is giving away in any other federation.
Case closed.
Case closed. But speaking of some of those names I just mentioned, Shawn, we are getting closer, and we are on the Arnold Classic watch. Seeing some videos out there. The guys are getting down there now, so now the clothes are coming off a little more. And by the way, not for nothing, but can somebody just take their sweatpants actually completely off instead of having them down around their ankles or their?
I know. I'm guilty of that. I remember we did a couple battle for the Olympians, and you drop them to show your legs, and you don't take them all the way off around your ankles. I mean, look, when you get older, you realize how stupid that was. I should have taken them all the way off, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But
And what's with the
the
socks
headspace,
being? What's with the giant the dress socks on now? What
yeah,
was that like
the
a new
head.
thing?
I think the headspace of the bodybuilders, and it's so spontaneous, is that we don't think it's going to live forever. But the further away you get from that moment in time, you realize how stupid you were that you didn't just take them all the way off. And those pictures and videos live forever.
I did see on the amateur side of things, we don't really cover amateur too much, but Sam Sulek, who has certainly made a presence in the world of bodybuilding the last few years, and God bless the kid. I met him last year at the Arnold UK. Nice kid, seemed to have his stuff together. And he's very popular. He makes a lot of money without competing, but he's now going to commit the cardinal sin of actually going on stage. I don't know if this is a good move or a bad move.
Well, he reminds me of the Australian guy. What was his name?
Who, Colin Von Mulger?
Yeah, Colin von Mulger. Sometimes it's better to be to kind of be mysterious. Victor Richards, when he
Yeah,
competed,
yeah,
the allure around him, the mystery around him, it kind of
sure.
disappeared because he wasn't able to like turn into this thing that we thought he was going to be. And sometimes it's better to be a little bit more mysterious. Now he's going to get on stage and he's going to be judged and he's going to be measured and he's going to be critiqued and people are going to have their opinions. It might take a little bit of that shine, that mystery off of him
Yeah.
because he's just another guy on the stage.
I'll be
And
I'll be
the
curious to see how it unfolds because he's so by the rules he's got to qualify by merely
yes,
going into a show. So I guess he's doing that this weekend.
yeah, that's in
Some show
Vegas.
I didn't catch where it was, but
It's
um,
Vegas.
in effect that will qualify him. Is that where it
Yeah,
is in Vegas?
yeah, Las
Um,
Vegas.
and and then he's going to go over to the Arnold. Now I
There's
saw
no,
some
yeah.
footage. So the kid's gotten in condition, but he does not have great genetics. I mean, he's
Here's
like the
here's
NABA
here's
guys. He's a little
here's
boxy.
here's what I see, and I see exactly what you see. Uh, Everybody else sees the same thing, but you got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
he's being more scrutinized because he got a big following. If he didn't have this following, and we didn't
sure.
know who he was going in, we wouldn't be talking about him. He'd be John Doe from absolutely nowheresville. So I'm not even going to chime in on it. It's his first show. Let him take his lumps. I mean, at the end of the day, what are we measuring? We're measuring a guy that has a big following. The big following from hard work. He built up his following. Now he's got to
Yeah.
get up there and be judged. And why judge him before it actually happens? Because it only takes one guy that's been training 5 years to put him into his place, or some guy that has genetic superiority to put him into his place. But he doesn't even know what he has. So I guess the true test of where you're going and why you're doing it is actually getting on a stage.
Well, I got to give him credit, and I'm rooting the kid on, and I'll tell you why. Because those names that you mentioned, unfortunately, didn't really get on stage. Even like the Jeff Kings, right? Like he got on stage. I mean, clearly he was a champion in the other federation, but didn't have the guts or whatever you want to call it to actually come over and compete against the best of the best. And I never understood that. But by the same token, like the Victor Richards, again, never materialized. The uncrowned Mr. Olympia. It's like he's not uncrowned. He's not even a pro.
Right.
So I have almost no respect for that. This is a different day in a different era, and this kid doesn't. He puts stuff out there, and it's his opinion. He doesn't think he's like the next Mr. Olympia. He's going to be taking on Samson anytime soon. But I hope he does well. But I got to give him credit for having the guts. As popular as he is, he's making the big buck and all that kind of stuff, for actually putting it out in the line and walking the walk.
Well, you can't call yourself a bodybuilder unless you actually go through the bodybuilding process. Otherwise, you're just a weightlifter. So he has to
Yeah, true.
experience what it's like to get out there and be judged like the other bodybuilders have, to stand up there naked, basically, to make it through the mandatory poses, to actually put together some type of resemblance of a routine. And look, He's working with Jay Cutler, right? I mean, you got 4-time Mr. Olympia looking at your physique and you've never competed before. I mean, I had Mr. Universe looking at me and I was just a teenager with, snot in my nose still. So he's got a very good start with people looking at him. But the limelight isn't for everyone, right? Like he could
Yeah.
build a big social following and have nice content, but getting on the stage, I mean, we've seen people not actually finish the show. We've seen
Yeah.
people wither under those bright lights and self-destruct and don't have the confidence, and the waterworks comes on and the color turns into a mess, and the nerves, and some people can't do it. So actually having to do it, I imagine it's like a girl who practices at home in those heels, and you only practice in the bathroom, and now you got to walk across an entire stage with everyone
Right.
looking at you. It's a different feeling, and he needs to go through it so he can call himself a bodybuilder.
And to see if he likes it. Like you say, it's not for everybody. He might discover, you know what, I just kind of like doing what I do even better, and that's cool. And hey, I did it once, but again, all due respect to a guy who at least is going to put it out there and walk that walk, because there's a lot of people who don't. All right, so to wrap things up, Shawn, you've seen some video like I have. Has anything changed in your direction of the top 4 or 5? I think last week talked in no particular order, but kind of sort of. We have like Samson, Derek, Andrew, Jack, Curry, Bonac, and Clarita in some order. It doesn't get funky until you get to about 6, 7, 8, and then there's a few names that can, kind of make it or break it in there. But you seen anything that's leading you towards a different direction with anybody?
No, I mean it's Samson's show to lose. It's
Yeah,
Samson's show to lose. It's Andrew Jack's got a lot to prove, and if he's going to do anything, he's got to do it now against Derek and put Derek in third. I want to see Shawn Clarita battling it out for the top 4 spot. I think he can do that. Um, and we're going to find out whether or not this is a swan song for Bonek and for Brandon Curry. This is make it or break it for both of those guys. They're aging out, and I say that
yeah,
respectfully because they both won the Arnold Classic. I think William Bonek, won it twice, if I'm not mistaken. I
yeah.
know that
He's got a
Brandon
few
won it
titles.
in,
Yeah,
yeah, Brandon won it in Ohio. He also won it over in Australia. I don't say that lightly, but if I'm Shawn Clarita, I'm licking my chops. He has an opportunity right now to take out 2 former champions and fight it out in there with, Andrew Jack and along with Derek. I think that would be huge for Shawn,
so.
carrying his flag for the little guys.
Oh yeah, hey, listen, this is huge, and he's in a no lose. I mean, listen, you're a buck 70 something out there. You can topple some more giants. It only adds to your legacy and your legend. So I'll be curious to see if he can hang with those guys. But he's got some big boys next to him. Question, Shawn: if Andrew Jack shows up, it looks like he did at Texas last year, and Derek shows up looking like Derek, and obviously whether it's the Olympia win or even last year, he's very formidable. Can Andrew Jack place ahead of Derek Lunsford?
100%.
So you think,
I don't think the lighting in Columbus is anywhere close to the lighting in Texas, so that's not going to favor Andrew. He's darker skinned,
yeah,
but I think it won't favor any of the guys. I think it's going to be tough for all of them. But Andrew Jack, I saw him win the Arnold Classic over in the UK. I saw him win over in
yeah.
Texas, and he's impressive. And I don't take him lightly. We know that Derek is a former Olympia winner, but Derek he has a lot to prove here. And if Andrew gets a snippet of Derek and winds up standing next to standing next to Samson as the last 2 guys standing, Derek's going to have a long road to the Olympia.
Well, Samson being the champ and a former Arnold champ certainly bodes well for Jack because he's the only guy that can stand next to him in terms of size comparison, muscularity, that type of thing. All the other guys are comparative, but they're all similar in size and structure. Derek, Bonac, Curry, and obviously Clarita's on the lighter end of things, but all those guys, the only guy that's kind of a question mark in there is Akeem, but I don't think he has the physique to hang with Samson and Jack. He can certainly contend, but I don't think he can contend with those guys. But Samson being the champ, definitely helping out Andrew Jack.
Well, I remember when we saw Samson coming from the back, and then he arrived. We said the same thing with Derek. He came up,
Yeah,
then he arrived. Same thing with Hadi. Hadi has now been chasing that number one. It would have been very interesting to have Hadi in this show. It'd be a
yeah,
replay
yeah.
of Olympia. But I think Samson is exactly where he needs to be. This will solidify the fact that he's the reigning, defending Mr. Olympia, and I think Derek For what it's worth, getting second again to Samson is not a failure. So Derek's going to have to understand that this is business. It's a bodybuilding
Yeah.
show. Many bodybuilders sat behind Ronnie Coleman for years. Many bodybuilders sat behind Dorian Yates for years. The mark of a true champion is to show up and compete. You can't win unless you show up to compete. So hats off to
Yeah.
Derek just for jumping in this show, not being afraid and be willing to be measured. Andrew's fighting his way to get some relevance. Andrew has a lot to prove here. And again, the swan song is Brandon Curry and William Bonek, and they're the elder statesmen that have won before.
Yeah.
This may be their retirement party if they don't show up and do the business.
Well, they're looking to me. They're still formidable. They can still contend, but they're contending for fourth and fifth. They're kind of hanging on to that top five, but they've got to get past Clarita, who you
He's the
can't
X
bet
factor.
against because he does show up, and Carlos, who's still a big question mark. I would love to see some updated pics or video from Carlos to see if he is getting down or if he's whittling that waist down, if he's drinking out that last bit of water because he's kind of an unknown. He could upset the apple cart of one of those guys or he could be fighting for, 6, 7, 8.
Well, he's better off not showing us anything until we get to Columbus, February 28th to March the 2nd. We'll find out then.
Fair enough, my friend. All right, Shawn, well, that's going to wrap it up for another edition of The Voice of Bodybuilding. And we will see everybody next week. For Sugar Sean Ray, I'm Bob Chick. We're out.